Tag Raid is a 2 to 4 player miniatures multiplayer arena battle from Corvus Belli, set in the Infinity Universe, which for those of you who don't know is a whole miniatures skirmish game system a la Warhammer, with a cyberpunk anime aesthetic. Tag Raid is built on the Code 1 rules, which are basically a slimmed down version of the full rule set, but all of the units in the game can be brought into a full Infinity N4 miniatures game if you decide to later pick it up. The unit profiles for full gameplay are available in the box, and unlike certain other miniatures games companies, Games Workshop, Corvus Belli are not known to generally sort of delete whole units or whole factions. They will almost always update the profile, as well as having very lax proxy miniature rules, so you don't need the exact out-of-print mini from 20 years ago in order to be able to play its profile. You can use anything of the same rough sort of shape and look. Anyway, the concept of Tag Raid is factions competing for valuable resources on a mining planet, where silly rules like land ownership or no killing each other are just ignored. The primary fighting force is a massive robot, also known as a tag or a tactical armoured gear, hence the name Tag Raid. They aren't just playing a massive game of tag, you're it. These robots are accompanied by other unit types, so prospectors, cutesy robots, hackers and engineers, of which you'll bring 2 to accompany them into the game. Now, forgive the crappy paint job, I just don't have the time to paint, so it's a minimum job effort for me at the moment just to be able to distinguish factions easier. The game differs from the main Infinity Miniatures game in the use of a modular tile system, as well as this massive worm that you must, well, not die from, and you can also get points from for successfully attacking, or neo materials I should say, because the whole game revolves around collecting these gemstone-like things which are a stand-in for points. You get neo materials for damaging the Mega Beast, or damaging enemy units, killing them, stealing their dropped loot, or curiously just mining out of one of the 2 mining veins on the board. First to 15 neo materials wins, but the game will also end if the Mega Beast is killed, or if the event deck runs through. You can run around the game board, attack stuff, interact with objectives, try to use the various scenery elements to your advantage, that sort of thing. Now that I've piqued your interest, let me just say that this was a Kickstarter exclusive game. It isn't sold at retail. Your only hope of getting one is via eBay and other secondary sellers. And due to the inclusion of unit profiles for the full Infinity game, I suspect most actual fans of the system won't be selling it anyway. So this is really frustrating as a reviewer, but it is what it is, and I wanted to put this review out there anyway, even though it may not be as beneficial to some of you as I'd like. So what's in the box? In the core box, you'll find 4 factions consisting of a tag, a mech, a prospector who's a heavily armoured miner dude in an exosuit, plus a remote, a cute little helper robot. There's also a massive store worm, Mega Beast it's called. For the environment and game board, there's 6 triple hex tiles, 3 double tiles and 3 single tiles, all of which are double-sided. Desert on one side, ice planet on the other, plus some really neat cardboard 3D scenery bits. There are 4 cargo containers, 2 mining facilities and 2 towers. On top of that, there's a stack of cards, dice, character boards and a score tracker. There's also a whole ton of extras for those who got the Platinum Kickstarter pledge. New unit types, as well as an expansion called Search and Capture, but with a different Mega Beast. I'm just going to focus on the core game here, because otherwise the video will be probably 6 hours long. So how do you play? Although there is a campaign book with various missions, we're going to talk mainly about a standard game. You'll notice there's some empty spots on a standard game setup. These are for the Mega Beast to spawn in and attack the miners. But otherwise they block line of sight and cannot be fired through. Think of them as like huge sand dunes or clouds of dust. There's no permadeath. When you die, you respawn immediately. But others have an opportunity to loot from your body. If your big robot guy dies, it's going to drop half of the neo materials that it's currently carrying. Let's talk briefly about the rules. I'm not going to do a full sort of how to play in this video, but I do want to explain some key concepts for players that are new to the Infinity Miniatures system in general that carry over here. That is of action concurrency, AROs, and face-to-face rolls. And if you like the sound of these mechanics after I've explained them, then remember this isn't just for Tag Raid, It's also for Infinity, the broader miniatures game system, so it might be worth checking out the new starter kit. So in most miniatures games, your active turn is where you do all your business. On opposing players' turns, you can mostly switch off, maybe roll some saving throws when you're told to. Obviously not great etiquette to actually switch off, but functionally you can. And in big games where turns can last at least sort of half an hour, it can get really boring. Not so in an Infinity game, because in the opponent's turn, you need to be constantly checking if you can react. So if anyone takes an action within your line of fire, you can react to it. That's called an ARO, or an automatic reaction order. So your opponent runs across a gap between buildings and you can see them. You declare a ballistic attack, you shoot them, and your opponent says, all right, I'll shoot you back as I run across. Then you'll both roll a face-to-face ballistic roll because you're shooting each other, and you'll see who wins the roll. If something hits, then you roll a damage saving throw, all the usual good stuff. So in Infinity, you're constantly engaged, maybe even more so in your opponent's turn. Everything they do might trigger one or many AROs from your units. It's not just choose one guy who gets to shoot back at the active player. It could be, okay, now you're in range of literally everything I have, and they all get an ARO on that idiot that just ran out of cover. I think it's brilliant. And this is the single biggest draw for me to Infinity, other than aesthetics. It's just such an engaging mechanic. The second point is that of action concurrency, which I sort of alluded to in the previous example. So a unit runs between buildings. You declare an ARO, a ballistic attack, to shoot them as you see them, and they declare their second order to shoot back at you. But at the start of the move, they had cover. So do they get a cover bonus? And you only declared it after they had moved, so if they were fully behind the building that they were moving behind now, does that mean you can't see them anymore and therefore can't attack? And they obviously can't shoot you because they're standing behind a wall now. So what happens there? The answer is conveniently no, 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 and no, because everything happens all at once. You're not going to shoot them when they're out of view, obviously. You wait for the ideal point, probably midway through, and then you shoot them when they're out in the open. Likewise, they wouldn't move and then shoot when they're out of range or blocked. Even though shoot was the second declared action in their order, they're actually going to shoot back sort of midway through the move as they run between, because that's the best place for them to do it. So these actions from the active player and any and all AROs against them all happen at once. It's not a sequence of actions, it's just everything, everywhere, all at once. The last point is a face-to-face roll. Not all rolls you do in an ARO will necessarily be face-to-face, but most of them will be if one depends on the other. And those can be a bit tricky to understand. For a ballistic attack, you need to roll to hit. Your target number is your base ballistic skill, let's say 12, plus or minus any modifiers. In Infinity, though, you need to roll under that number or equal to it. Getting your exact target number dead on is a critical hit, but anything underneath is still a hit. So modifiers to that base skill will increase or decrease your target number. For instance, if your target is in partial cover, you get a -3. So your new goal is to roll a 9. But when the roll is a face-to-face roll, because you're trying to shoot someone before they shoot you back, well, now you not only have to get your target number or less, you also need to get higher than what your opponent rolls. So let's take an easy example. You're both shooting each other, no cover, no modifier, the same 12 target. You roll a 10, they roll a 9. Both are hits, but your hit is better than theirs, so it cancelled it. You got your shot off fractionally before them, and you've got one hit on them, for which they now have to roll a saving throw. That's a whole other area of complication I'm not going to talk about. But sometimes this will mean that your burst 3 weapon, that is 3 dice rolled on your active turn, is entirely cancelled by their 1 ARO snapshot back at you. Let's say you roll a 9, 10 and a 3. Those would all be hits from your burst 3 rifle. Brilliant. But they rolled an 11. Their 11 cancels out all of your lesser hits. Critical hits will always win regardless of whether it's higher or lower. And if you both get a critical, then I guess you both critical hit each other's bullets so perfectly as they're flying through the air, because no one gets anything. And you might be thinking, well, doesn't that mean I could just die on my own active turn, just get unlucky, lose a face-to-face ARO? That doesn't sound fair. Yes, and it absolutely happens all the time. Maybe you just wanted to run over there into cover, but the enemy tag sees you and Even though you try to evade their shot, that's like roll out of the way. The dice aren't in your favour, they get lucky, and that one hit kills you. Next time, maybe don't run in front of giant robots. You don't really have a choice though, he's standing there, you're in front of it. And the same thing happens with the Mega Beast. If you're in its line of fire when you take an action, then chances are it will gobble you up. Whew! So those concepts are key to the game of Infinity and Tag Raid, and getting your head around them will mean everything else drops into place. And honestly, it is quite tricky to pick up. The whole Infinity system, I don't think it's very beginner friendly. So is Tag Raid a good game? The components are gorgeous. The smaller minis are metal, like all of the Infinity miniatures. The larger units, the tags and the worm, they're plastic. So with a little less detail, but generally it's the same high quality that we've come to expect from Corvus Belli. And the fact that there are unit cards to use all these fantastic minis in a full N4 Infinity game is brilliant. Which I think means even if you aren't a fan of Tag Raid, you might have picked it up anyway just for the miniatures. Tag Raid is itself, as I said, a slimmed down arena version of Infinity Code 1 rule set, which is itself a slimmed down version of the full N4 rules. And yes, it is infinitely more complicated, pun intended. And as such, Tag Raid plays best with the full complement of players rather than the main Infinity game, which is one-on-one. The main issue, though, I think, with Tag Raid is that in a real game of Infinity, you have your own curated army list, you have your own special skills, your unique army characteristics and tactics and playstyles. Every army is dramatically different. But with the core game of Tag Raid, everyone is basically the same. The models might be different, but the starting equipment is the same, the stats are the same, and because of that, you end up differentiating only by grabbing new items, new weapons from these lucky draws. And that makes it very swingy. If you are lucky enough to spawn next to a weapons crate, you might get a long-range rifle right off the bat and dominate from afar. For me, Infinity should be about playing to your advantages, playing tactically, besting your opponent with strategy. But there's none of that here. And while it is a fun way to bring multiple players into a sort of Infinity game, it definitely loses a lot in the process. Now, the expansions and campaign system, it goes some way to fixing that by assigning secret contracts at the start of every game, having upgrades that you can purchase in between campaign missions, specific paths for your tag to take to specialize in, and all of them are tracked on your faction's campaign sheet. So it starts a bit boring with having a single tag, but by mission 2, it brings in a wider unit choice than the base selection of Tag, Prospector and Remote. There's a different Mega Beast campaign and a 5th faction expansion too. The campaign, I'll say, is proving to be a lot more fun, and we're only partway through it. The biggest hurdle for me with Tag Raid when it comes to getting this to the table is just the quirks of the rules. It's not something you can just drop a new player into, and yet at the same time, really experienced Infinity N4 players might find the limited rules and lack of faction uniqueness to be really frustrating. The problem is that the base game of Tag Raid just isn't all that fun. Not that it matters, of course, because you probably can't buy this anyway. If you enjoyed this review or found it helpful in any way, please hit like and consider subscribing. I promise next time I'll review something you can actually buy.